All right, welcome to 10.3 day 2. We're talking about outliers and creating data sets given the mean, median, mode type of information. Okay, so your goal today is can you identify outliers? We're going to get a formula for that. And sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. And then also creating data sets. So an outlier is a number that's unlike the other numbers in the data set. It's too far out of the range. Remember we did yesterday box and whisker plot, so it's too far out of the range. So I think yesterday we did an example where the right whisker was just way down there. That's most likely an outlier in our data because if all of our data is clumped over here, we have one way over here. That's called an outlier, and the opposite is true. If all of our data is clumped over here, we're going to have an outlier that could be way over here. There won't always be an outlier, but it's going to affect your mean, median, mode, and range sometimes with that outlier. We're going to talk about which one will it affect the most. Right, so outliers, there's a formula like I said. And yesterday we learned what the IQR is. And the IQR, remember, is Q3 subtract Q1, right? So in order to find the IQR, we need to find Q1 and Q3, right? And once we find that, any number that's above our upper cutoff is going to be an outlier, and any number that's below our lower cutoff is going to be an outlier. So if I found Q3 and I found my IQR, I multiply my IQR first by 1.5, and then I add it to my Q3, and that gives us the upper cutoff. And the lower cutoff has to do with Q1. I take my Q1, and again, that 1.5 times the IQR, I subtract it from my Q1, and I get my lower cutoff. So any number that's below the lower cutoff is an outlier, and any number that's above the upper cutoff is an outlier. All right, so we're going to start with an example of a data set. So here's our first data set, 30, 0, 4, 8. Okay. Remember, our first step is always to order the data. So I have 0, 0, right? 4, whoops. Looks like I have 3 8s. 1, 2, 3, a 10, 2 12s, and a 30. And I'm going to bet that you guys can take a wild guess and see what our outlier is. So see if you can take a guess at what our outlier is. I'm going to guess that it's 30 because it looks like it's way out of the range of our data, right? Yesterday we talked about 5-number summary, which is min, Q1, median, Q3, and max. Today I'm going to add to that, and I also want you to find the range and the mean. So 0 is our min. Our max is 30. And again, that's what we're guessing out our outlier is. Next, we need to find the median. So remember, I do this. I go find each pair until I get to the middle. Right? And again, when it's two numbers, it's the average of the two, but in this case, it's 8 and 8. So my median's 8. So I separate my data right at those 8s. And Q1 is the median of the lower half. My Q1 is 4, and my Q2 is 12, or Q3, excuse me, is 12. Right? The range of this data is 30 is my max, subtract my min is 0, is 30. And then remember to get the mean, add the numbers, divide by the total number of values. So if I add these up, I get 0 plus 0 plus 1. And I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 numbers. My mean is 9.2. Next step, find the IQR. So remember what the IQR is. Q3 subtract Q1. So my Q3 was 12. My Q1 was 4, so my IQR is 8. Next, I do 8 times 1.5. Because remember the formula is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR, and Q1 subtract 1.5 times the IQR. So 8 times 1.5 gives me 12. All right, I'm going to move that out of my way here. So remember this is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. And this one is Q1 subtract 1.5 times the IQR. So I already did 1.5 times the IQR. So I take 12 and I add 1.5 times the IQR. And I get 24. And I take 12 and I subtract and I get 0. All right, so any number above 24 is an outlier. So my outlier is 30, and any number below 0 is my outlier. So I have zeros in my data set. Those are okay. It's any number below that cutoff. Okay. So, oh, I did this one wrong anyway. Goodness. I took my Q3. I need to take my Q1. So I should take my Q1, subtract 12, and I end up with a negative 8. I don't have any numbers below that. So the only outlier I have in this case is 30. Okay, so next we're going to see how does that change if I take that outlier out. So we're going to reorder our data. I should have just copied it in the order. 3/8, 10, 12. And again, I'm not going to include that 30 anymore. I took out my outlier. My min is still 0. My min is 0. My max now, instead of being 30, it's now 12. All right, so then I find the median. And it's still 8, so the median hasn't changed. And then I find Q1. All right, remember when we get in the middle, we average them together. So 0 plus 4 is 4 divided by 2. Or you can think, what's exactly between 0 and 4? And the answer should be 2. And then over here, split my data this way. And when it's between two numbers, you average them. Or you can think, what's exactly between 10 and 12? And I hope you get 11. Next, we're going to find the mean. So 0 plus 0 plus 4 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus. And now I only have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 numbers. My mean is 6.89. The IQR is Q3 subtract Q1. So 11 minus 2 is 9. And the range is 12 now. So it says compare the measures of the mean, median, range, and IQR with and without the outliers. So let's go back here. The median, has it changed? Nope. Median hasn't changed. So let's go with which values have not been greatly affected. That's where the median's going to go. The median has not been greatly affected by it. Right, let's look at the range next. The range was 30, and now the range is 12. So I would say that's a considerable change. So the range has changed quite a bit. Let's look at our mean for this one. The mean was 9.2, and now the new mean is 6.9. That's a pretty big change for a mean. So the mean has also changed. All right, and what else is there? The mean, median, range, and let's look back at the IQR. We don't have it up there, but the IQR we found down here, and it was 8. If I go back, my IQR is 9, so I would say the IQR hasn't changed that much either. Okay. So the ones that have changed are the range and the mean. The median and the IQR haven't been changed that much. Okay, so the measure of center that's greatly affected by the outlier is the mean. Right, so the mean is greatly affected, and the median and the mode are not really affected. So one that's not really affected is the median. And also, we didn't look at the mode, but the mode's not affected by an outlier because it's just the most common occurring number. Right? So the reason we're looking at this is because outliers can affect the measure that we pick to describe our data. If we have outliers, the mean is probably not the best measure to pick to describe our data when we're talking to someone else about it. So the other alternative would be to use the median or the mode to describe it. So I want you guys to see which we're going to see which measure of central tendency best describes this data. So Rico scored the following on his test. So we're going to do this one as a class, and then you guys are going to do the same process again and see if there's any outliers. So first, we need to order our data. Ooh, Rico's smallest score was a 54. Rico, what are you thinking? 67. Oh, all right, we're improving. 73, 74, 75, and 80. Let's hope he's going on the upward trend with his test scores at 54. Okay, so now I want you to see if you can figure out the min, Q1, median, Q3, and max since we did that yesterday. So the minimum, 54, maximum, 80, median, so right between 73 and 74. So it's 74, 73.5. Q1 then, we split it. Q1 is 67. Q2 is, or Q2, I always say Q2. Q3 is 75. Right, next step, we find the IQR. It's Q3, subtract Q1, remember. So Q3, 75, subtract 67, leaves me with 8. So my IQR is 8. And next we need to find the cutoffs. Right, so cutoffs would be, remember, above is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. And the cutoff below is Q1 subtract 1.5 times the IQR. So I like to calculate 1.5 times the IQR, which is 8. And we get 12, just like we did last time, actually. Right, so my Q3 is 75, so 75 plus 12 gives me a score of 87. So does Rico have any scores that are above an 87? We should hope, but sadly Rico doesn't have any scores that are above 87. Then I take my Q1, which is 67, and I subtract 12, and I get 55. And then you say, does Rico have any scores below 55? And the answer is yes. He has a score of 54. So are there any outliers? The answer is, yep, he has a score of 54. Right, and going back up here, forgot to find the mean. So if I find the mean of this, I add up all my numbers. I get it's 70.5. Okay, and so it asks us which number best describes Rico's scores. Which one? Should it be the mean of 70.5 or should it be the median of 73.5? Right? I want you to stop and think and say, why would I choose the mean? Why would I choose the median, depending on what you think? I would say that since we have an outlier, that outlier is dragging my mean down. So Rico's test scores look really bad. So if I look at the median, I would say it's a better spread or better measure because of the outlier. That outlier is dragging my mean down, so it looks like Rico's really doing bad on all of his tests. If you look at where that 70.5 is in his data, it's really between 67 and 73, and he has 4 test scores that are above that mean. So I don't think it's the best measure. And then it says, which should you use to describe his score to his parents? And again, since the median's higher, I would say the median, because he wants to tell his parents he's doing really well. And so he should use the median to describe his scores. All right, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure out if there are any outliers. All right, some numbers magically appeared on your page. I hope you got these for the min, Q1, median, Q3, and max. Remember, just like last time, I forgot to write to calculate the mean, but that's one of our measures of central tendency, so we're going to find that. So the mean in this case is 80.1. Okay, so it says, now I calculated the IQR already for you. Remember, it's Q3 subtract Q1. And remember, I always like to do 1.5 times the IQR right away because I know I'm going to need it for my cutoff. So I do 1.5 times 9.5 and I get 14.25. So again, this is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. And this is Q1 subtract 1.5 times the IQR. So I take my Q3, which is 84.5, add 14.25, and I get 98.75. And it doesn't look like Josh has any scores above that. And then I take my Q1, which is 75, and subtract 14.25. And I get 60.75. And does Josh have any scores below 60.75? And so it says, are there any outliers? The answer is no. Josh is doing pretty well with keeping his scores in the 70s and 80s. So it doesn't seem like he's going to have any outliers. So next it says, which measure best describes the scores Josh received most often? Okay, so Josh received a 75 most often. So the mode would be the best to describe that, which is 75. And I, again, forgot to have you find the mode up here. Right, and lastly, it says, which measure best describes his scores overall? So if I look at this, an 81 for the median and an 80.1 for the mean, they're pretty close. I would go, I mean, he's getting 75, 81, 84, and 85. I would go with either one of those, the mean or the median. Since there's no outliers, the mean is not really being affected. So I would say that the mean best describes his scores because that's what we usually use. And there's no outliers, so the mean is not being dragged down or dragged up by a number. But since the median and mean are so close, you could go with either one, really. Okay. All right, the last thing we're going to do is making up data sets or creating data sets that match a certain thing. So for this one, it says create a data set of 3 numbers where the range is 12 and the maximum is 20. So what I like to do is whenever I see something about min, max, or median, that means I know that that number has to fall in my data set. So my maximum is 20. I can go ahead and fill in one of those. And then it tells me the range has to be 12. So see if you can figure out what this first number has to be, just by giving that the range is 12. Right, so I hope you were thinking, well, my range is 12, so 20 minus something has to equal 12. Well, 20 subtract 8 equals 12, so that means my minimum has to be 8. And it doesn't tell us anything else, so we could pick any number between 8 and 20 to be in the middle. So I picked 15. If you wanted to pick a different number, your data set would still match. So let's try one more. It might be a little bit harder. It says now we have 5 numbers where the mean is 15. So the most difficult thing when you get a data set is that the mean, if the mean is given, it's a little bit more difficult. It tells us the median is 14 and the mode is 20. So this one is a lot harder actually. So see if you can figure out one number in here. Right. So I hope that you said, well, I have 5 numbers. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I were finding the median, I would end up getting right in the middle. And remember, that means that it has to be that number, not in between. Okay, so we know one number is 14. We know the mode is 20, so that's a key piece because 14 is smaller than 20. So it means these last 2 numbers have to be 20 in order for it to be created twice. So when we're creating data sets, we put them in order first. And so we always want to put them in order so we can see, especially when they give us the median, because the median, the data has to be in order. And the last thing we have to take into account is that the mean equals 15. So how I take care of this is I say, well, that means I have to add up all my numbers and they have to divided by the total number, which is 5. So add up all my numbers. Divide by 5 has to equal 15. And so I want to get rid of that 5. I'm going to multiply by 5. So that means when I add up all my numbers, it has to equal 75. Well, I already have 3 of my numbers, so I'm going to add those up. I get 54. So I'm going to subtract 54 from my total. I get 21 left over. So that means these last 2 numbers have to add to a total of 21. So I'm going to pick 10 and 11, and they have to be smaller than 14 because we're writing them in order, remember. So 10 plus 11 equals 21. So let me just check and see if the mean is 15. Right, and I got 15, so my data set works. If you pick 2 different numbers that add to 21, it still works out. So notice there's not always one correct answer when you create these, but the biggest thing you have to think about with the mean is when I add up all my numbers, what does it have to equal, right? So this is our last example, I believe, so I want you to try this one. See if you can find what x is in this data set. So remember, our first step is to order it. So see after you order if you can figure out what x would be if the median has to be 18. All right, so I'm going to order my data. 12, 16, 24. And I don't have x in there yet. It's got to go somewhere. Okay, so 16. So I know that if I put x here, the median would not be 18 because right in between 16 and 24 is 20. So that must mean that x has to be here, and then it has to be 20. Not 20, excuse me. And then we have to put our 24. So I'm going to fill in up here 12, 16, x, 24. Right? So in other words, the 12 and 24 don't have anything to do with this problem. It's really when I get the median, I get 2 numbers. Remember, that means the average of those 2 have to add, and then divide by 2 have to give me 18. Right? Or another way you can think of it, well, my median needs to be 18. That's 2 away from 16. So if I go 2 away on the other side, will 18 be in the middle? The answer is yep. So what does 18 have to be? To go 2 away, so I should get 20. Right? I hope that creating data sets gets a little easier as you go on. Just think about it as you go on with your worksheet today and your book assignment. Right? I hope this helps.